So without further ado, I'll hand over to Gemma and to Hannah, who are going to talk you through a bit of background to the indicator that we've been developing. Over to you, Gemma.
Thank you, Pete. So yes, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, everybody. So let's get into it. Why are we developing a new indicator? So we are approaching the final stages of negotiating the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, which will take place at the CBD COP15 in Montreal in December. The text presented on the screen shows Target 3 as of the recent open-ended working group in Nairobi earlier this year, but noting a smaller informal group meeting took place in September. But as you can see, a lot of the text remains in brackets, which means it has not been agreed yet. However, the importance of assessing how effective protected areas and OECMs are at conserving the environment is a clear theme. So, as we all know, alongside the negotiations on target wording, we are also negotiating on the indicators to assess these targets through the monitoring framework. The current proposed headline indicator for Target 3 is coverage of protected areas and OECMs by effectiveness, key biodiversity areas and ecosystems. However, the existing indicator for measuring effectiveness, which is based on the PAIM framework and drawn from the global database on PAIM assessments, only records if management effectiveness assessments have occurred rather than if conservation outcomes have been achieved. So as Pete mentioned, in response to this, we were commissioned by DEFRA to start work on this in 2021 to support the filling of this gap by the development and trialling of a new protected area management effectiveness indicator, otherwise known as the MEPCA Indicator, Management Effectiveness of Conserved and Protected Areas. So the need for the development of this indicator was further realised at the recent Bonn workshop, which reviewed the monitoring framework and identified the by effectiveness element of the headline indicator as not currently meeting all the assessment criteria and requiring further development, the very point which underpins our work on developing this indicator. So what does the MEPCA indicator include? Well, it has been developed based on the existing qualitative OSPAR management status for question approach. The approach considers whether management information is documented, if management measures are in place, if monitoring is in place, and whether the site is achieving its conservation outcomes. This has been successfully applied across the Northeast Atlantic since 2016 and is assessed every 2 years. So the MEPCA indicator is a framework indicator capable of absorbing existing protected area and OECM effectiveness data for a streamlined approach and being able to build on existing evidence. So the indicator is applicable across marine, coastal and terrestrial ecosystems and will provide quantitative data on the global status. It includes weightings for different governance types to allow for a fair assessment with a focus on the achievement of conservation outcomes by all protected areas and OECMs, regardless of approach to underlying governance or management. But this is one of the points we will be discussing today to really consider if those weightings are applied correctly or if we do in fact need them at all. So very much looking forward to hearing your views on that. So importantly, the indicator draws focus to the delivery of conservation outcomes. And yes, with all the above elements in mind, the way it has been developed has been thought to be relatively simple, easy to understand and flexible to ensure its global applicability. So to date, we have engaged with protected area management authorities and used available data of 552 protected areas from 8 countries and territories to test the indicator to assess its global applicability and aid its further development, with each case study providing key insights and improvements to the indicator and its global applicability. Through these case studies, we have gone through 5 iterations of the proposed indicator, and I'll go through a couple of the ways this is improved in the next slide. So yes, it shows you the indicator of development from version 1 right through to version 5.2, which is where we are today. Versions 1 to 4 were informed by existing PAIM assessment methods, OSPAR full question approach, with developments to the indicator, including increasing the number of metrics, applying the weightings based on the governance types that I just mentioned, and revising these weightings to ensure the final score is consistent between these types. Then versions 4 to 5.2 were informed by the case studies, with developments including reducing the complexity of some of the metrics, including the supporting definitions and wordings, and to better consider OECMs. We are continuing our trialling at the moment with case studies focusing on OECMs currently underway in Scotland and Australia. So this is the schematic of the current version of the indicator. It is supported by a detailed set of definitions to allow consistent and accurate metric responses. And the indicator itself is housed within a spreadsheet to allow for quick calculations of the overall indicator score to be made. So the 4 OSPAR questions were converted to quantitative metrics, which are C to F on the screen, and then supplemented by additional metrics. The first 2 metrics, A and B, are what is the governance type of the conserved area and how is the conserved area categorized. They are not scored, but they are used to inform the weightings of the overall indicator. So just going through the metrics there. So as I mentioned, the OSPAR metrics. So the first one is C, which is management information compatible with conservation outcomes documented. The second, D, are management measures being implemented for the area to achieve conservation outcomes. E, is ecological and/or environmental monitoring in place? F, is the area achieving conservation outcomes? Then we have G and H, which provide the confidence in the achievement of the conservation outcomes. Then at the bottom of the screen, you will see how the overall scores are calculated with the application of weightings, which I will go through on the next slide. So this table presents the breakdown of how the weightings have been applied at the moment. As I said before, one of our key outputs of this workshop is to really understand if these are correct and give people the opportunity to suggest changes and to discuss further. So it's really a metric C and metric D, which have differences to account for differences in the weightings to account for the differences in the governance types. So metric C is management information compatible with conservation outcomes documented. So the primary difference in the weighting for this metric between the governance types was related to the legal requirements associated with designating a protected area under national or international legislation, with government-led protected areas being given a higher weighting for this metric compared to community-led protected areas and OECMs, of course. So this is because the government-led areas have been designated under legislation and have a ministerial requirement to document management information. Therefore, essential government-led protected areas provide officially audited documentation before implementing management measures. Alternatively, there are no legal requirements for community-led protected areas and OECMs to provide management documentation. So while this may result in fewer efforts to document management information, a key component of effective protected area and OECM management, it does not hinder progress towards implementing the measures. So then moving on to metric D, are management measures being implemented for the area to achieve conservation outcomes? So the primary difference in the weightings here was related to balancing competing objectives, with community-led areas being given a higher weighting for this metric. So this is because whilst government-led areas are most often designated with primary purpose of conserving biodiversity, community-led areas may have other primary purposes, such as providing livelihoods or ecosystem services to communities that depend upon them. In such cases, biodiversity conservation may be a co-benefit or secondary goal, and there may be need to balance other uses with conservation. So careful management is important to ensure the balanced recovery of nature alongside the continued security of local livelihoods, or other purposes of the area. So whilst this may result in government-led areas scoring higher for simply documenting management information, this may be outweighed by greater legal, political and public pressure for governments to actively implement conservation management measures. And then yes, we have metric E on is ecological and or environmental monitoring in place, and metric F on is the site achieving the conservation outcomes, which we felt at the moment should be weighted equally. So I look forward to discussing these further in the breakout groups with you all. I will now pass on to Hannah, who will take you through the supporting definitions for the indicator.
Brilliant. Thank you, Gemma. Hi, everyone. So I'll be taking you through the definitions, as you can see here. So we're also interested in gaining your thoughts for these definitions. And as you can see here for the first question, which is what is the governance type of the conserved area? We have various different protected and conserved area types here, and these are based on the IUCN governance types. So we'll be looking to see if there's any other categories that we have missed here, and we'll take you through that during the breakout groups. And Gemma, if you wouldn't mind going to the next slide, please. So the next one, I won't get you to read all of this, but this is on the metric B, which is how is the conserved area categorised. And again, these are the definitions that are based on the IUCN protected area categories. So we have the supporting definition for each type, which will be provided to help you decide which is most suitable for you. And again, we'll be going through these to identify whether any of these are missing or whether these are suitable. And then Gemma, if you could move to the next slide as well, please. Thank you. Great. So for this one, this is for metric C and D. So this is about whether the management information is compatible with conservation outcomes and if this is documented. So for the various different metrics, the answers follow a similar pattern. So this is yes, partially, no, and unknown. So this is for, you can see the definitions depending on the answer vary slightly. So for example, if there is management information, the area has biodiversity appropriate management information that is documented and in use. And then for partially, you can see that the area has biodiversity appropriate management information documented and or management documentation which is drafted but not in use. And then for no and unknown, as you can see, that would be that there's either no management or the management is unknown. For metric D, we have this one as our management measures being implemented for the area to achieve conservation outcomes. And again, you can see the similar answering pattern here. And the supporting definitions vary from the measures are implemented, some of the measures are implemented or are in the process of being implemented, there's no implementation in place, or it's unknown. So you can see the pattern and the definitions there. Gemma, if you could move to the next slide, please. Thank you. So moving on to metric E. As you can see, this is for the ecological and/or environmental monitoring in place. So we have for yes that there is reoccurring ecological and/or environmental monitoring conducted at the site, and we have some examples here. So particularly in the breakout groups, if you have any other examples here, or if you think the wording could be changed in any way, we'll be looking to get that from you in the next phase of the workshop. Again, for partial, you can see it moves down kind of this hierarchy of it's then irregular monitoring in place. And again, some examples provided for you there, including proxy monitoring is conducted. So moving on to metric F, which is the area achieving its conservation outcomes. Again, this one, the answer is slightly different for this one. Fully and partially are the main changes there. So if the conservation outcomes are fully met, some of them are met, they're not met at all, or it's unknown. So you again see that pattern there. And then Gemma, if you can move to the next slide, please. Thank you. So this is the final definition. Again, we won't get you to read through this just now, but we will show this again during the breakout session. But this is about the level of confidence associated with achieving the conservation outcomes. So again, the answer for this is slightly different. It's based on whether there's high confidence, which you can see has the highest score there, moderate confidence, low and not applicable. And again, the definitions follow that similar pattern of the sufficient monitoring data available. There's some available, no data, and it's not applicable. So that's the supporting definitions for the metric questions. And then Gemma, if you could move to the next slide, please. Perfect, thank you. So as discussed, we would like your input on reviewing and refining the MEPCA indicator weightings and supporting definitions. We'll, after a short Q&A session, just to get initial thoughts and queries, we'll then split into breakout rooms to gather your thoughts. But we just really want to thank you for taking the time to provide feedback on the MEPCA indicator. As we really want to make sure that the indicator is as globally applicable as possible, and we really value your input. So that's the last from me, so I'll pass back to Pete for this one.